Hey everyone, I'm RV Micah, and welcome to the show, where thanks to the virus, not only do I have to wear this mask, but I haven't gotten a haircut in like 2 months. And I know that it's about half a year overdue, but it's finally time for the finale of the Tetrispective. I can't do where the freaking... I can't breathe in that. When last we left our beloved series, we reached an era where the Tetris games began to sort of blend into one another. With the introduction of the Tetris guideline, the games that followed Worlds had very little variety with how they worked, and a number of gameplay changes that honestly hurt the game more than they helped. However, I neglected to mention one very particular change made by the guideline, and I got a lot of comments pointing that out. Thanks for keeping me in line, guys. The Tetris guideline introduced what's referred to as the Standard Rotation System, or SRS for short. It's kind of hard to describe, but it's essentially a revised set of rules for how blocks interact with each other when you rotate it, and around what point blocks spin when you rotate them. It's how you can pull off crazy crap like this. And this. And this. And this. I very stupidly forgot about this mechanic in previous installments, but you know what? I think it's honestly okay I left it for this part, because modern Tetris games feel very much more like they're designed around these crazy advanced techniques, since the points you get from a T-spin are usually more efficient than the ones you get from clearing Tetrises. You know, the thing that the game is named after. And with all that housekeeping out of the way, let's finally put an end to the Tetrispective.
And now the wall is down, the Marxists frown, there's foreign shops all over town. When in
So in the last video, I alluded to talking about Tetris mobile games, so we'll start off this part by talking about the EA mobile version, which released in 2011 and shut down earlier this month actually. It was replaced with another version of Tetris that isn't really worth discussing. So why am I talking about a defunct version of the game? Well, I think it's important when talking about the state of the franchise at that point. Okay, the first thing I should note about mobile Tetris games is that touch controls aren't really the greatest way to control it. To illustrate my point, let me tell you a story about Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Mario, and how he helped in the creation of the game Punch-Out. Originally, the game's interface was planned to involve the player actually punching in real life, but Miyamoto put the kibosh on that in favor of a traditional joystick and button interface. He justified his decision by saying that the interface should be intuitive and not have any ambiguity whatsoever. So, what does this have to do with Tetris? Well, controlling Tetris on a touchscreen is kind of a nightmare because of how imprecise it is. The inputs for a soft drop and hard drop are really similar. It's all too easy to move the piece horizontally while dropping it. It's not really clear how to rotate it clockwise versus counterclockwise. On most touchscreens you can't even really do two things at once, so like no rotating and moving left at the same time. And oh yeah, the gameplay's still getting faster and faster, so it might not even be physically possible for you to rotate a piece before it gets too far down. But really, that's just all mobile Tetris games. How is EA's version specifically? Well, it had a subscription service. Tetris. A game that you can play for free on an internet browser. With a subscription service. In addition to the main Tetris mode, you also had Galaxy mode, which requires you to reach the bottom of the stage by clearing lines. Although, you can also buy special powers to make it easier. Yeah, it's one of those mobile games. I wouldn't mind the traditional one-time payment to get rid of ads. That's standard for mobile games, but it's Tetris, you guys! The game wasn't bad or anything, but it absolutely reeks of EA soullessness and greed, and the new version that replaced it isn't anything to write home about, but it's got personality at least. But even with EA milking the game for all it was worth on the mobile port, surely things were just fine on the console side of things, right? In 2014, the license to Tetris was obtained by Ubisoft, and they were set to release a game for the series' 30-year anniversary. Tetris Ultimate was meant to be the one true Tetris, released for every game console that was around at the time. How did it go? Well, its page on Steam lists it as a psychological horror, so that answers that question pretty well. Let's ignore how generic the game is, how bare bones the modes are. Somehow, Ubisoft did the impossible. They managed to make a version of Tetris that barely worked, with slowdown, frame rate inconsistencies, accidental misdrops, faulty connections to the internet, getting a different game mode than the one you clicked on, the list goes on. And then the Steam version was released, which somehow managed to be even worse. On top of all the above issues, there was crashing. You heard right, crashing. In Tetris. A game that was made on hardware that was outdated even back then. A game so simple you can play it on a calculator. Crashing. On modern hardware. Now, all that was bad enough, but there was one other problem. See, due to Ubisoft having the license, all other Tetris games available digitally were delisted. Remember Tetris Axis last time? That was delisted. The Virtual Console release of the Game Boy version? That's gone. So not only was this game an awful excuse of a Tetris game, but you suddenly had fewer options, which makes it so ironically delicious that Ultimate itself wound up being delisted. So that's kind of a shame. Ultimate was a disgrace, and thanks to the licensing deal, we wouldn't get another Tetris game while Ubisoft held the license. Or so we thought. You see, in 2014, on the Japanese side of things, Sega came out with Puyo Puyo Tetris, a crossover between Tetris and another puzzle game, Puyo Puyo. If you've never played Puyo, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine is literally the same game, so you've played Puyo. But what you might not know is that there's actually a storyline with a ton of characters in the Puyo series. But what sets this game apart from, say, Worlds, is that the story here is very character-focused. But more importantly, it doesn't take itself seriously in the slightest. Even when the fate of the universe is at stake, the game makes it clear that it's all in good fun. In terms of characters, you can divide the cast into the Puyo characters, who have been with the series for years, and the Tetris characters, brand new to this game. On the Puyo side of things, you have series protagonists Ringo and Arlie, Arlie's companion Carbuncle, who's incidentally the most annoying thing ever. Then you have Satan, yes, that's the biblical Satan, and you have the very creatively named Witch, along with Draco. Draco's my favorite. You also have characters like Shazo. His gimmick is that every line he says sounds really perverted when taken out of context.
The time has come for me to clear my reputation by assaulting this young girl! Let us focus on Lulu. We should advance on her slowly. You stay put while I make advances on her.
That's it. That's his character. Not exactly complex, but hey, it's funny. The Tetris half of the cast is from space or another dimension or something, and they're all named after different kinds of Tetris pieces. You might recognize T from the thumbnail, Baymax over there is named Zed, and of the new characters, my favorites are easily Goten and Trunks, I mean J and L. They're lovably obnoxious, but sadly they don't really matter to the plot. Then there's the kind of, sort of, not really villain, X. The entire plot of the game is that he's the guardian of space and time who's responsible for keeping the dimensions from bleeding into each other, but he's getting lonely and depressed, so he's slacking off and Tetris blocks are showing up in the Puyo world. So your goal is to travel to the far edge of the universe to beat the crap out of him so he can do his job again. Honestly, these early bits of the story are my favorites. You see, Puyo is one of those universes where everything, and I mean everything, runs on the game. Kinda like how everything Yu-Gi-Oh! Revolves around card games. And honestly, it's hilarious to me when the two universes cross paths and are baffled that they play different games.
She doesn't play Tetris?
He doesn't play Puyo Puyo!
Now, the gameplay is a bit trickier to talk about since every mode is a different combination of Tetris and Puyo. You got your regular multiplayer battles, but then there are modes like Swap, where every so often the game switches from Tetris to Puyo and back again. And if you're in the middle of a combo, the results will spill into the other game style. It's kinda like Tempest from Elements, except it's less redundant because it does switch into a different game. You can also play Fusion, which is basically Tetris and Puyo at the same time. I mean, you could play Fusion. You could also hang yourself. And to be honest, it would probably be a better use of your time. I'm sorry, this mode just feels slow and wonky, and these games were never meant to be played at the same time. But one bad mode does not a game ruin. The thing I love about this crossover really is how customizable it is. You can choose what style of blocks you want to use, including a theme that turns your blocks into the shiny, miscolored ones from the arcade version. You can also change the music with some great tunes from both Tetris and Puyo, and you have a lot of cool backgrounds to play on. But as I mentioned before, the game was originally Japan exclusive, but when Ubisoft began to devour the series into its gaping black hole of despair, Sega found a loophole in the agreement that allowed them to release this in the West. I'm not sure the specifics of how they pulled it off. It might be because the Switch didn't have Tetris Ultimate on it, it might be because the game was technically already out at the time, but in any case, Puyo Tetris was released in the West in 2017. The end result is that not only did we end up getting a good Tetris game, but this is one of the few Puyo games to be released in the West. The vast array of both single-player and multiplayer options of both genres, as well as the silly, stupid, but nonetheless enjoyable story, makes this one that I can easily recommend. But that's not where the story ends, because over the next couple years we got not just one, but two of the best games to ever bear the Tetris label. And the first of those was a little something called Tetris Effect. In 2018, video game developer Resinair, best known for their work on the game Rez, released Tetris Effect for the PS4. Named for the real-life phenomenon in which playing the game for a long time will cause the player to start seeing Tetris in real life, Effect is absolutely breathtaking visually and musically. Every time you move a piece, it affects the music. The more lines you clear, the music grows and grows. And the music itself is really, really good. Combined with the breathtaking visuals, the experience of playing this game is absolutely hypnotic. Just watch. The gameplay itself has a ton of variety, with the various modes cleverly sorted into 4 categories. Classic contains the usual challenges you see in all Tetris games like Marathon and Ultra and whatnot. Relax just lets you sit back and play the game without having to worry about failure so that you can just sit back and enjoy the visuals and the music. Focus contains a few modes where you have a specific target to speak of instead of just clearing lines. Last is Adventurous, which has modes that are a bit more experimental and a bit more off the wall, like a mode where completely random effects hinder your progress. This is where you get my personal favorite mode, Purify, where you have to clear these infected blocks as quickly as possible, and they'll spread if they're left alone for too long. The one problem with Effect, is that it doesn't have multiplayer, but honestly, a battle mode would just clash horribly with everything else the game achieves. In terms of raw single-player content, this is probably the best Tetris game. It was released for the PS4 in 2018 and on Steam the following year, and it's VR compatible. If you want a Tetris experience as opposed to a mere game, you owe it to yourself to check it out. It's designed to pull you in and never let you go, with its ear-meltingly beautiful music, hypnotic visuals, and breathtaking atmosphere. And then, in 2019, we got the complete friggin' opposite with Tetris 99. To put it bluntly, Tetris 99 is a Tetris Battle Royale. The number 99 in the title refers to the 99 players in a single match. The game plays much like a regular Tetris battle mode, except you can choose which of the 98 opponents you want to target, either manually or based on certain criteria like who's targeting you, who's got the most KOs, etc. The game keeps a lot of its mechanics hidden, but I honestly think that's a good thing. Not only does it introduce an element of unpredictability into the game, but it rewards the player for figuring it out. For example, if you set the game to target everyone who targets you, that's the only way to target multiple opponents at once. And not only that, the power of your attacks actually increases the more people you're targeting. But this means that they're more likely to target you and deliver garbage to you. There's a shocking amount of depth for a Tetris game. Actually, a lot of this game's mechanics are derived from the defunct online game Tetris Friends, which had a similar multiplayer battle mode which allowed you to select your targets. But as I said, that game is no longer a thing. And hey, if you own a Switch, Tetris 99 is completely free. Well, okay, it still requires a Nintendo Online subscription and has paid DLC, but really, the Battle Royale mode is the main event here, and I highly recommend it if you want to put your Tetris skills to the ultimate test. But you want to know the most interesting thing about Tetris 99? It was developed by Arika, the same guys who made Tetris the Grandmaster. And while I lamented the fact that the guideline meant the Grandmaster line became defunct, there's been an interesting development in that regard. You see, not too long ago, Sega released the Genesis Mini, a retro console that comes with 40 games built into it, and one of those games is the classic Tetris. Completely unchanged, the rules identical to how they were in the 80s. To understand why that's a big deal, let me bring your attention to the Tetris collection on PS2. It had all the Sega arcade Tetris games on it, but in order to get it past the Tetris guideline, they had to create a new game mode called Tetris New Century as a Trojan horse to get the darn thing approved. But here we have the Sega version completely unchanged. Could this mean that the tyrannical hold of the guideline might be loosening? And speaking of the guideline, it was at this point, talking about this latest batch of Tetris games, that I really started to actually see the advantage of the guideline. Now, I lamented a few rule changes that I disagreed with, but while the early days of the guideline had an annoying lack of variety, games like Puyo and Effect and 99 have some pretty off-the-wall ideas, but they never became overwhelming. That's because the basic gameplay is the same from game to game, so they're free to introduce new concepts and visual effects to the formula that are borderline intrusive, but never actually interfere with the gameplay because it's so familiar. If you had to relearn the physics in Tetris Effect, the particle effects probably would hinder the gameplay. If you had to relearn the gameplay in 99, on top of all the other mechanics, it would be way too frustrating to be fun. And since Tetris 99 is the most recent mainline Tetris game, it looks like that streak might keep going, with Tetris taking advantage of the consistent gameplay to do new and cool things. We had a bit of a dark age with Ultimate and EA, but I think the future of Tetris looks pretty bright. But before we wrap this up, I think we should go back through the series so I can give my personal recommendations of which games I think are the best. My personal favorite is Super Tetris 3. The gameplay is smooth, the atmosphere memorable, the music great, and it's for my favorite console. If you want the best way to play classic vanilla Tetris, I'd go with Tetris Classic. The Russian atmosphere gives it an edge that other classic games don't really have. If you're looking for a stiff challenge, Grandmaster is fast, frantic, and controls perfectly. All of the Nintendo 64 versions, specifically New Tetris and Magical Challenge, are pretty good both in their general gameplay and their own unique elements. Battle Gaiden contains a cool twist on the traditional battle mode, Worlds has an offbeat personality and a decent variety of modes, Tetris DS has a ton of 8-bit flair, Effect is the best modern game in regards to single-player content, and 99 is a unique, satisfying, addictive twist on the Battle Royale genre. And you know what? I honestly wouldn't have played half of these games if it weren't for this retrospective, so everyone, thank you for coming on this journey with me, thanks for watching, and I hope you all stick around because all throughout the month of May, I'm going to be talking about a bunch of games themed around Star Wars. So everyone, see you around!